So, this is very exciting for me because this is the first time I have sat with another human being apart from my partner, who I've been sharing lockdown with since all of this began towards the end of March. So I'm Val McDermid, and this is Mary Paulson-Ellis, and we're sitting in my back garden, and it's amazing.
Yes, thank you for inviting me here. It's kind of quite exciting, isn't it?
It's the socially distanced walk through the house, not touching anything.
I know. I was very careful to turn myself sideways as I came in the front door.
So here we are speaking to you under the aegis of Moniack Mhor, and today we're going to have a conversation with a wee exercise at the end about creating character.
Yes.
Now, I think that both Mary and I would agree that our work is pretty much character driven.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's, people often, I think the one question, apart from the usual where do you get your ideas from, that people ask me a lot is how do you build suspense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the only way you build suspense is by building strong characters that readers connect with. You know, you've got to end a chapter with a car going over the cliff. Nobody cares about a car going over a cliff. What they care about is who's in the car.
Yes.
Or who's down at the bottom of the cliff.
Yes, absolutely. As you
And
said before, who's on the beach.
Yeah, well, these days it could be hunters if you honestly.
Yes, pretending they're not on the beach.
Yeah. But that's the key point. It's that you have to care what happens when that car goes over the cliff, and you care
Yes.
because of character.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that completely. It's very hard to, this idea of just creating suspense out of nowhere, or creating sort of pace out of nowhere, creating a cliffhanger, literally a cliffhanger out of nowhere, because you have to have something to hang it all on, basically. And character, the human being, really, although you can have character in place and setting, maybe we'll talk about that later, but really human character is at the heart, certainly of everything I do.
Yeah, and with me, a book always starts with an idea of a story.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll get a little nugget of something that will make me go, oh, that's interesting, or oh, I didn't know that, or what if this happened instead of that? What if they believed him instead of her? What if this wasn't how it was actually portrayed as being? But as soon as I've got that initial nugget, what actually drives that nugget of story to being a plot is the characters that people that story.
Mm-hmm.
So it then becomes, I think of it sometimes almost as a biofeedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
Character feeds story, feeds character, feeds story. The more you learn about the characters and their possibilities, the more things open up.
Yes.
In terms of story, and also other things close down.
Yes.
In terms of story, and that's valuable when you're in an imagined universe where theoretically anything could happen.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really interesting, actually, because I was thinking about this before because we were going to do this chat, and for me it always starts with a world that I want to explore, which for me is the world of people who die with no next of kin. So straight away, of course, it's people. Yes, it's the individual who's died. And then for me, it's the people who are then a lot involved in that person and getting them to their funeral or chasing their money or cleaning up after them. So for me, yes, I thought it's about the world they're in, which is a world about an individual. Why have they ended up in that situation? Who were they before? What happened to them that led them to that place? And then who are these individuals who are going to come and explore and find out about them? And so without those two sort of central points from my books, they just don't mean anything to me, really. Why would I spend all my time writing them? I mean, novels can take quite a long time to write and can be very tricky to write. So you have to really have something at the heart of it as a writer that means something to you. Otherwise, why would it mean anything to the reader? And so yes, at the heart of it for me is the character, and they have to mean something to me, even if they're really annoying, or I find them really frustrating, or I find them really stubborn and obstinate and withholding. You know, they have to mean something. If I'm indifferent, there's no point writing the story.
No, I mean, we don't have to like a character to be invested in their fate.
No.
And sometimes we're more invested in the fate of a character we don't like,
Yes.
that we find morally repugnant, or whose general attitude is not something that we can connect to. And it's very difficult to carry on a relationship with a character if they break that trust, in a sense, if they break that continuity of your
Yes.
relationship with them. I remember very early on reading a lesbian feminist crime novel, and I was really enjoying it, and really liking the central character who was a cop, and then she went to bed with someone, and the way she behaved in the bedroom, I found so objectionable, so repugnant. It just broke that role,
Yes.
and I just didn't care about her anymore.
Yeah.
So you have to bear all these things in mind, is that as you move forward, that you have to keep a consistency here, that somebody's not going to go like, oh wait a minute, the person I've involved myself with would never do that.
Yes, that's really interesting, that ability to keep a character authentic to themselves. Because when I wrote my first novel, The Other Mrs. Walker, the character in the contemporary narrative in that is a woman who has to find out the next of kin of someone who's died and get that person to their funeral. And she was quite a difficult character to write. Margaret Penny, her name is, because she sort of she's been brought up not to say anything and to keep secrets, basically, which of course was part of the point of the book. And so I found her really, really, really frustrating, and quite a withholding character who liked to live in the grey area of life where everything's a little bit ambiguous and you're not quite sure what she really thinks. And at the very end of the book, there was this question of how much would be revealed and how much she in particular would know. And my publishers did actually ask me to change the ending of the book. They wanted me to have what you would call maybe a more Hollywood ending, where everything is revealed to the reader, everything is revealed to the main character, Margaret Penny, and we all go off happy into the sunset, or miserable into the sunset, one or the other, but everybody had to know, that was the point. And I sort of, as a debut author, I was like, yes, that's fine, okay, I'll do my best. And off I went, and I just couldn't do it. I could not do the total reveal, because I thought, that is not Margaret Penny. You cannot, she's a character in her late 40s in the book. I thought you cannot have gone through a whole story with her where she deliberately avoids knowing, she deliberately avoids asking certain questions, she deliberately sort of does a body swerve around certain information because it will reveal things she doesn't want to tackle. And I thought, so at the end it's just impossible that you can have the sort of, moment where she learns everything or she asks everything. And so I did a sort of halfway house.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because whenever I do events or have had feedback from readers, they either really don't like that because they want the total reveal, or they go, I think it's the perfect ending for that character.
I think you're right about that, because one of the things about Margaret is as you progress through the book, you keep going like, ask that, do that, yes. and so it's almost like she's someone in the room with you, a friend almost, or somebody that you know, and you go like, why didn't you do that?
Yes, exactly, but that's brilliant, isn't it, for me?
Yeah, because you care.
Yes, exactly, because then the reader is interacting with the character. I mean, I get asked a lot about her because they always go, oh, they're not very likeable, the characters in your books. And I do wonder if that's because A, I'm a female author and my characters are female in that book, and I do sometimes wonder if women get asked that more than male authors, but of course I don't know the answer to that. But people seem concerned with this question of likability, and if you ask people who their favourite characters are, they certainly are not the people who are likeable, do the right thing, generally have a positive outlook on life,
Yeah, I mean, one of the most popular literary creations of recent years has been Olive Kittredge.
Yes, she's
she's
fantastic.
And she's horrible. I mean, you just think, if she was my mother or she was somebody who lived next door to me, then she'd drive me mad.
Yes, totally.
And, you wouldn't like her.
Exactly.
But you engage with her and you invest in her future.
Yes.
And I think when you're creating character, I think it's almost like I sometimes think of them as being on wheels. Because they're moving forward as you get to understand what they're capable of in the future. But you have to move back with them as well. Often if I'm looking at the story, I'm looking at a character and I'm thinking, I need a character who is going to do this within the story.
Yes. And
so in order for them to be capable of doing this as opposed to that, what is it in their history that's brought them to this point? So often with characters who are playing a bit part in a single chapter, I still have to think a lot about what brought them to that point.
Yes.
What's their history? What kind of family did they come from? Where did they grow up?
Yes.
What kind of school did they go to? Where did they go on their holidays? And a lot of that is just, if you like, a complete waste of time.
Yeah.
But what it does do is give me a sense of how I can get them to behave going forward. And I think with the crime novel in particular, you're often reasoning backwards from the ending to how you got there. So there's a lot of thinking about, I need this character to do this in chapter 33. So what is their backstory? Why would a normal human being behave in this way? Why would you do this? What made you this person? And that interrogation is, for me, I think, the most fascinating part of prepping a novel. When you start thinking about a novel, and you start thinking about whose story is this, whose book is this, who am I talking about here? And I don't know about you, but I interrogate them literally. I have conversations. We're lucky we live in this nice part of Edinburgh. We've got the Water of Leith just down the road. We've got Inverleith Park. We've got all these marvellous paths and cycle paths around this part of town where you can just go and walk. And these days, the great advantage of earbuds is when you walk along talking to yourself, nobody thinks you're mad, nobody thinks you're a nutter.
Yeah,
Not like in the olden days when I started. If I was walking around the park talking to myself, people would like drag their children out my path. There's a mad woman over there.
It's so interesting, that idea, isn't it, of talking to your character, so literally talking to your character, and the implication being that they talk back. And I know there was some research done recently, wasn't there, which said that a really very high percentage of writers, fiction writers we're talking about here, said that writers can hear their characters speaking to them. I mean, I'm certainly like that. It's kind of a weird thing to describe. I think hearing is a sort of the nearest we can get, if you like, to the idea of the voice in the head. It's more that idea to me of the power of the imagination to create something that is only in your head, but which feels somehow separate. That's what's so interesting. Now, whether it's because you talk to them and they give you information back, or whether you can hear them, which is very much for me, turn of phrase or the pattern of a sentence, how they might speak in dialogue, I feel like I can hear them, and then when I write it down, then I read it out and I can go, yes, it's like a feedback loop.
I do the same thing.
So, yeah.
But do you hear them spontaneously?
No. I don't hear them spontaneously.
I always initiate the conversation.
Yes, I know. No, I'm not a sadistic.
I'm not one of these people who thinks they've got a life of their own. They talk to me, they do their own thing. No, they don't. They do what you let them do.
No, you see, that's really interesting, right? Because I understand what writers are saying when they say that. Because once you're deep in a book and you are working the material and your imagination is coming to bear on to get the words onto the page, in some ways, yes, they're alive in your imagination, and so they sort of live, and you hear them, and it is almost like they're spontaneous characters that just exist out there and have come into you, and you have somehow just channeled them. But actually, that isn't what happens. You have created them. They have come from within. And for me, it's interesting what you say about this idea of needing to know their history. I mean, my novels have dual time frames, so they have a contemporary narrative and a historical narrative. And so in some ways, I literally bring the history onto the page. That's very important to me. But yes, that started because of exactly what you're talking about, which is this idea of deep diving into somebody's past, whether they're a minor character or a major character, because sometimes I don't know, in order to get a sense of who they are now. And so for me, that is where the imaginative idea and the idea of them coming to life so that they almost feel spontaneous and separate and living in my head comes from, because I have done the work, usually of writing it down, bit by bit by bit, of thinking, who are you, where are you in time and place, when were you born, what other events were going on, did you have brothers and sisters, what were your parents like, what did you do when you were 10, what did you do when you were 20, and as I write that down, literally it sort of grows legs. It becomes, instead of it being more factual based information, I start to write stuff that's more imaginative writing, and then out of that, then I start to hear them in my head. So yes, absolutely, I generate that voice in my head.
Yeah, I mean, some of my novels have also had split time frames, and you've got to be really careful with that character, that you don't do something when they're 20 that you cannot that you cannot ignore when they're 45 or 50 or 60.
Yes.
It all has to be of a piece. I mean, there's nothing makes me lose faith with a book faster than sitting there looking at a character going like, you wouldn't do that.
Yes. Yeah, well, this is the terrible catch-22 of writing a book, and certainly for me, because I'm just sort of at the very beginning of my career as a novelist, and I've written 2 novels that have been published. I've written another novel that was never published, and I'm writing my 4th novel at the moment. But yes, the terrible catch-22 for me is I have an idea of who I want to write about. I have an idea of why I want to write about them. I tend not to have a plot, although I do tend to have a sort of rough end point. So I'm sort of have a rough idea of where I'm heading, and some sense of therefore what the territory they're heading into might be. But in order for me to understand my character, so that she can fulfill and be authentic and be a whole novel, I have to write the novel. But in order to write the novel, I have to understand the character. It's a terrible catch-22. I mean, honestly, at the moment, it's driving me completely demented, really, with my character. But I mean, maybe you've got an answer to that catch-22 because you've written so many books now.
I don't know. I mean, I think E.L. Doctorow, the American novelist, talks about writing a novel being like driving at night. You know where you're starting from, and you know what your destination is, or you have a pretty good idea where you're heading for, but all you see is the bit of road in front of you lit up by the headlights. And you have to trust in yourself and your capacity to write the characters and to find the story that will take you to your destination, or near as damn it. Now, when I started out, I didn't write like that. I did not trust my storytelling skills. I did not trust my ability to make a plot work, and so I literally had file cards, and I wrote it down section by section on my file cards, and I started at the beginning and I worked my way through to the end. And some people sort of have said to me, that sounds like a straitjacket. It didn't feel like a straitjacket to me. It felt like a roadmap. And the great joy of it was that as I was writing, very often things occurred to me because I understood better about what the characters were capable of, and I also understood possibilities that the story opened up to me. So I could take a detour, but I always knew where I was coming back to on the story spine. And I always felt that was the safety net. I knew where I was going with the story. And so that gave me the freedom to concentrate on making the characters come alive. And I knew if I had the basics of a story and I made the characters come alive, people would read the book and people would engage with it. And I stuck to that method for probably about the first dozen or so novels that I wrote, maybe even more than that. And then it just stopped working for me. I sat down with one book to write this book, and I started planning it out, and I got about halfway through, and I couldn't get the next bit. It was like wrestling water. I just could not pin it down. You know that thing when you're at school and you've got mercury in the chemistry?
And it runs everywhere.
And
that's a very good analogy for a novel.
That was what it was like, and I was just like, oh God, what am I going to do? And so I thought I'll start writing, and when I get to that point, I'll know, because very often in my file cards there would be a file card that said, at this point something has to happen, not sure what it is yet, but I'll know when I get there.
XXX.
And I got to the end of my file cards, and it's quite disturbing because I didn't really know what was happening next, and I started to panic. I couldn't pin this story down. I knew what the end of the story was, and I knew some of the things that had to happen in between, but I couldn't make sense of it. And my deadline was getting closer and closer, and my editor would ring me up from time to time for a little chat, and I'd be saying, yes, I'm fine, I'm writing, it's great, there's nothing to worry about here, look away now. And in the end I ran away. I went off to a place that I stayed in Italy. At the time there was no phone, no Wi-Fi, no radio, no TV, no nothing. Up an Italian hillside, and I just got up every morning and sat from 9 o'clock in the morning to 7:30 at night and made myself put words on the page. And then I'd go and have a lovely home-cooked dinner from Mama Rosa, bottle of wine, go to bed and get up in the morning and do it all again, and I wrote 65,000 words in 9 days. And I thought the last day I was there, I couldn't speak in sentences. I was just sitting by the pool with my mouth open and all that.
Well, all the sentences are on the page by then.
And in the end, what got me through that was an understanding of who these people were. I let the characters that I had worked with that far in the story drive me forward, because I had a strong sense of the kind of things they would do. It was, I think, the fourth Tony Hill and Carol Jordan novel. So at the heart of it were two characters that I knew very well by that point, and that I understood how to make them get a story told, as it were. And that was what did it for me. But I like you. I mean, I do spend a lot of time communicating with my characters, We have a mug in the cupboard that says, "What would Karen Perry do?"
Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's so interesting how you describe that, because I'm definitely not a planner. With my second novel, I tried, that's published, The Inheritance of Solomon Farthing, I tried to plan that quite a lot. And I spent months actually working it all out, and I had magic whiteboard on the wall, which is fantastic stuff. But it's terrible as well, because of course you can rub it out and start again. So I kept sort of instead of writing anything, I just kept sort of redoing this plan on the wall.
But it does read like a beautifully constructed piece of work. I mean, it does read, it works. It's like it's dovetailed.
Yes, that's what's really weird about it, right? And I think this is where maybe I'll have to write many, many books to understand my own process. So basically I spent ages and ages writing this plan. It got more and more complicated with endless lines and dotted lines and circles and characters and this and that and the other, and time frames, because I was dotting around in time as well. Then I sat down to write. I literally got to about chapter 3, classic kind of, done the introductory stuff, now what do I do? I had my plan, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. There was something I didn't know. And so what I did then, I kept trying, nothing. I got more and more panicked, as you describe, and then I actually took myself off as well. I went off to a little fishing village, which you know well, in Fife, called St Monans, and sort of booked myself into an Airbnb for 10 days, basically, and I'm quite a night owl when I'm allowed. When I don't have my normal domestic routine, I'll basically write at night, pretty much. And so I would write till sort of 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I generated a huge amount of material, quite a lot of which is in the final published book. And what that material all was my characters. That's exactly what it was, and it's exactly how you described. It was this sense of getting to know the characters and understanding what they might do, and giving them one scenario. Because I knew one thing I wanted them to do, which was to play this game. It was the game of chicken. And they're in a scenario, it's set at the very end of the First World War, and so these young soldiers are waiting for the end to come, and they know it's coming, but they don't know when. The reader knows, of course, when it's coming, and therein lies an element of suspense because the reader brings hindsight. But I just had to get to know them. And so they play a game of chicken, and they play gambling, and that is a very good way, that kind of setup of discovering and understanding your characters. And then, of course, I went, well, if so-and-so won the game, what's the other person going to do? And that gave me the next chapter. That gives you the chapter after that. And the funny thing was, of course, by the time I actually finished the whole novel, which took me a whole nother 18 months, I looked at the plan on the wall, and I looked at what I'd written, and they were very similar. Very similar. Yeah.
But you also have to remember that your process may change.
Yes.
Because after that experience, I never wrote another outline again.
I know, weird.
And I've now got, I now when I sit down to write a novel, I know whose book it is. I spent a lot of time working with the characters. I know who they are. I know the kind of things that they're capable of doing. I know quite a lot of detail about them, but I don't know much about the process of the story, the progress of the story. I usually know one or two key turning points, and then I know where I want to be at the end of the novel. But sometimes even that isn't entirely clear. There was one standalone novel I wrote, The Vanishing Point. Right from early on, I knew where the final scene was going to take place. I knew who was in that room, but I did not know who was going to walk out alive. And it was only, I was about 2/3 of the way through the book when it was inevitable to me how that scene should play out. And that was, again, it was about the exploration of the characters, not anything else. There was nothing else. It wasn't what would be the most dramatic moment here. It was like, what is the most likely situation?
Yes, absolutely. I find that really interesting, right? Because I think sometimes when we get caught up in discussions about the craft of writing, and how to build character, or how to plan a plot, or how to structure a novel, etc., you lose sometimes the magic that happens when you just write, when you put your sentences down on the page, when you're engaged with the idea of a character, or the idea of a setting, or the idea of a story, even however faint it feels, with no particular denouement planned in your head. Because, of course, a huge amount of writing is the subconscious, and what you as an individual and your imagination bring to bear on the material. So this idea that you get sort of halfway through a novel and then realise that actually what's the person who's going to be dead at the end is not the person you thought it was going to be, is such a wonderful thing. It's the magic and the art of writing, which is a very important thing not to forget about, to allow that to exist. But it can be very frustrating waiting for that to come out.
Another important element of the engagement between writers is tea or coffee and cake. And
Yes.
we're having a proper socially distanced piece of cake here.
We
I
are.
made this cake earlier in the week, and it's necessary to eat it, obviously. I think it's quite good.
Oh, very nice.
Mm.
I actually can't write. Oh, excuse me for talking my mouth full here.
What?
I actually can't write without drinking tea.
Mm.
But I drink green tea normally, although I drink any tea, whatever's available. And it is quite a strange thing that those little props that you have as a writer.
Yeah.
To being able to, I did used to eat constantly penguin biscuits, and other biscuits are available, by the way. And I've had to train myself off it, and and so now I tend to eat rich tea biscuits. Maybe I'll be able to get myself down to oat cake soon.
I used to smoke, and that was a great help for writing, you know, because I would pause to think,
Yes.
and I would have a
Light
cigarette,
cigarette.
and the cigarette would be the sort of punctuation mark of thought.
That's like you being a character in a novel.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, when back in the days when I still smoked, if I woke up in the night, and I was not going straight back to sleep, I would get up and go to the office and do some work, do a bit of writing, because that was an excuse to get up in the middle of the night and have 2 or 3 fags. See, so now I wake up in the night and I just go, oh, fucking go back to sleep.
Yeah, you trust your subconscious to work for you while you're asleep. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it does, yes.
But that's really interesting, right? I'm someone who in my books, objects and stuff of life, as I call it, is very important. But actually, I think this idea and how people interact with it is what matters to me. And yes, I think this idea of character traits, so the trait you had as a real person of, you know, using the cigarette as a prop by which to prompt your subconscious, I suppose, and then using it as an excuse when you woke up in the night, you know, using the other as the excuse to go and actually just have the nicotine craving, etc., is a really, really, really interesting character trait, and it tells you a lot about a person at any one point in time. In my book, The Other Mrs. Walcott, in the present day narrative, I have a woman, Margaret Penny again, and she has come to Edinburgh. It's very cold, and she's only got a coat which she stole, and she goes into her mother's wardrobe and finds a fox stole. And of course, a fox stole in contemporary times is a very unpolitically correct thing to wear. But she does wear it, but she hides it under her coat. She has it tucked under the lapels. And so that in itself, the fact that she would steal it first, the fact that she's happy to wear it, but the fact that she would hide it, that tells you a lot about that character without me having to describe her really in any way.
Yeah. When I gave up smoking, I mean, it was a long time ago now, I did wonder if it would interfere with the process of writing. But actually, the thing it interfered with much more than the process of writing was the process of talking to people on the phone.
Oh, really?
Because I've been a journalist for a long time, and so it's a classic case of you pick the phone up, you lit a cigarette. That was like,
interesting.
and that was the thing I found really weird. I kept reaching for the non-existent packet of cigarettes when the phone rang.
So did it make it harder to sort of have a more, to allow a conversation to develop with the person in order to get the information you wanted?
I don't really know, because all the time I was thinking, I want a cigarette. It didn't thankfully interfere with the writing, which is a good thing. But yeah, I'm
Is
like,
that why you gave up being a journalist? Right?
no, I gave up journalist first. But yes, so all of these we do develop these little tics and things, and I can't think in sentences before I have my second cup of coffee.
Yes, and these things are actually really important. I'm not a huge describer of the physical appearance of my characters. I do it occasionally, although sparingly, and actually, funny enough, my editor always asks me to do it more. And again, it's one of those things that I just kind of try and find another way to do it, because it just doesn't feel right to me, and therefore it doesn't feel right for my characters. But yes, of course, how a character acts, how they behave, how they react, how they wear the fox stole, these are all crucial clues that you, the writer, are giving to the reader in order for them to be able to feel that they know that person and that they know them in a kind of intimate way too.
I think you're absolutely right there. I mean, I've just, for reasons which I won't go into now, but I've been rereading some P.D. James and Colin Dexter and Reginald Hill from the 1970s. And I noticed that particularly P.D. James does this, and to a degree Colin Dexter does it too. When anyone walks into a room, you immediately get a description of what they're wearing, what they look like, in very, very sort of straightforward terms.
Yeah.
And I don't think many writers would do that now.
No.
And like you, I don't tend to go in for great physical descriptions of people. When I wrote the Lindsay Gordon novels right back at the beginning of my career, nobody else was writing lesbian crime fiction in the UK. And I had grown up without any templates for a life. There was no lesbian fiction to speak of, there was no lesbians in the soaps, there was no visible lesbians, especially growing up in Fife.
Well, there weren't any lesbians.
There weren't no lesbians in Fife, no.
That was the point.
Absolutely. And I was very conscious when I was writing Lindsay Gordon that I did not want to describe her, because I wanted readers to have their own Lindsay Gordon.
Yes.
So she could be your fantasy girlfriend,
Yeah.
or she could be you on a good day or you on a bad day.
Yes.
But I didn't want people to have their idea of what Lindsay Gordon was like physically dictated by me.
Yeah.
So that was a very conscious decision, and I think I don't describe people very much.
No.
I have a picture in my head often that I don't
Yes.
quite manage to get onto the page, and I've had the same thing with you with editors and indeed readers saying, why don't you tell us what they look like? And I kind of got round it in the Tony and Carol novels by having Carol develop the habit of, whenever she encountered someone new, she would kind of create a picture in her head as if it was a police description.
That's really clever, actually. That's a really neat little device.
Yeah, so that was one thing that sort of got me around a little bit of actually not wanting to say he was wearing navy corduroy trousers and a tweed shirt. I mean, sometimes you do want to describe what someone physically is like, because it tells you a lot about them, what they have chosen, how they've chosen to present themselves.
Yes.
But I think a lot of the time it can be quite dull. You've got to find ways of doing it. Some writers do it very well.
Yeah, some people, if you can do it, great, fantastic. And if it feels right for your story, then that's fine. But that's so interesting what you said there about you would only describe a character physically in maybe particular detail if it was something to do with how they thought about themselves. That, which of course is what we're saying about having to understand the characters, even the minor characters. How do they understand themselves? That's what you're trying to reach for, isn't it, in order to make them live on the page? And that's where also the problem can be, because you think, well, I have no idea how they think of themselves, you know. Yeah. So
I think one writer who's very good at that bit of giving you little bits of clues about how people look without doing anything as clumsy as saying she had grey hair and she was very slender for her years. Yeah. Is Doug Johnson.
Yes.
I think Doug does it really well. Lots of small details that accrete, until over the course of a book you've got a very good sense of what a character generically looks like, often without anything specific.
Yes.
And I find that really part of the pleasure when you come across a writer who does that kind of thing. Well, Andrew Taylor's another one.
Yes.
They sort of build that up as the book goes on, and there's a pleasure almost that parallels your pleasure in getting to know someone.
Yeah.
That you're getting to understand them. You know, because when you first meet someone, you just take in a big picture of them. And as you get to know them better, you notice the details of their appearance, the details of the kind of clothes they wear, the details of what their face is like, what they do with their hands.
Yes.
And I think a good writer will take you through a character in the same way.
Absolutely. Well, it's this idea of the layer upon layer of personality, and part of that is appearance, isn't it? Because, like you say, your personality comes to bear on how you present yourself to the outer world. I mean, physically. And also, then, of course, the family you've come from brings to bear on that. But then, of course, there's all the layers of personality, history, experience, events that have happened to you or that you've lived through, etc., etc. And so, that deep dive through the sort of watery layers of a character. I mean, that's one of the great pleasures of it, isn't it? You know, when it's working for you. I mean, it can be tough, but when it's working for you, you think, when they start to live, that's the point, isn't it? There's always a point for me in the writing where I go, oh, I've got you now. Yeah. I've got you now. Yeah. And that's what I'm really struggling with now in my fourth book that I'm writing, which is about a cleaner who's an extreme cleaner. So she cleans up after people who've died with no next of kin and maybe been lying in their flat for anything from a week to 2 years. But she also cleans up after hoarders who are still alive and you know, people who've let their houses go and all this kind of stuff. And what's interesting about her is I know what the real heart of her journey is. The cleaning is her job, and in some ways a metaphor for the real story of the book. And so that's fine, I know that about her. But can I kind of pinpoint her as an individual as opposed to her as an idea no, I'm not sure I've done it quite yet. And I have to constantly write about her as dressed in her coverall suit with her mask over her face, which of course is incredibly sort of relevant right now, but she's not doing it because of a pandemic, she's doing it because she cleans. And what's sort of happened is I realised that I literally have to unmask her. I have to get the mask off her in order to start to get her to sort of feed back to me, or for my mind to feed back to itself, to say, who are you really behind the mask, you know.
And where do we get this information from? Where does it come from? I mean, people, you know, I started out as a journalist. I was a journalist for about 15 years, and I like to say I was a child journalist, you know. But the one thing that I think that I benefited from extremely as a journalist was I was a general news journalist, and I met all kinds and conditions of people, from Prince Charles to unemployed homeless people. I interviewed them at their places of work, in their homes, their social lives, and I amassed a huge data bank of how they spoke, what they looked like, how they reacted, how people reacted to them, all those clues that help you to build character. So they're still tucked away in the filing cabinet in the back of my head. But you build on that all the time, and to be a writer, you have first of all to be interested in people. And you have to be nosy.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
you have to definitely
we are
be
the
nosy.
ones. We are, you know, what Burns called the Chilamungi taking the notes.
Yes.
We're the ones on the bus listening to the conversation of the people in front of you or behind you. We're the ones on the train earwigging what's going on in the seat behind.
Yes, be careful what you say to a writer.
Be careful what you don't say to a writer, what you say to the person sitting next to you on the train in confidence.
I did an event for a book group recently, and I was invited to go along and talk to them because I know it was a friend of mine, it was her mother whose book group was in the book group, and she said to me as we were walking along to go and have this very pleasant evening in this very pleasant Edinburgh living room, she said, that story at the heart of your book, she's talking about the other Mrs. Walker, which involves a laburnum tree, she said, that was my mother's story, wasn't it? And I sort of shuffled my feet somewhat and said, yes, it was. And she had told me, I had been with my friend at her parents' house many years ago, I mean, you know, a good 15 years ago or something like that, and she had told me this story that involved a laburnum tree in her mother's family. And it stuck with me ever since, and I found the perfect vehicle for it in the other Mrs.
Well, that's
Walker.
we
And knew no
cannibalise.
shame.
We cannibalise everyone's life. We eat our own lives, and then we eat the lives of the people around us.
Absolutely.
You know, my partner keeps saying I just steal her best lines. You know,
Yeah.
I'm
Do
she's
you, give
quite
them
right.
to, do you give them to interesting characters? That's what really
Well,
matters.
sometimes.
So we can chart your relationships through your writing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm a great wanderer of graveyards and places like that. I mean, these are the kind of things that really get me going. So, as well as objects, it's the graveyards, it's the family trees, it's the narratives that lie behind those names, those dates, etc. So, of course, for me, yes, it's totally the human, and then it's the adventure of the human, if you like. I'm a huge fan of Kate Atkinson's novels, and in particular her Jackson Brodie novels. And the first one of those is a very interesting book for anyone who's interested in character and writing, and particularly detective sort of or crime fiction, which those books are in a certain sort of hybrid way. Because Case Histories, the first one, basically starts with extended character studies. It lays out over about 70 pages 3 different cases, and they are character studies: the Land family, Theo Wyer's family, and then the story of a young woman called Michelle. And all of them have in common lost girls, which is Kate Atkinson's great theme that she always writes about. And it's not until page 69 or 70 of the paperback that Jackson Brodie, the detective, actually shows up. And then there's at least 10 or 20 pages of character study of him before you get anywhere near a sense of plot. And yet those books are absolutely masterful in the way they draw all those what seem like disparate strands together and wind them tightly into a sort of rope that connects everybody and brings out all the stories of who they are and what they've done and why they've done it. They're real masterpieces and sort of symphonies that somehow build these wonderful crescendos.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right about that. I mean, I think the first 3 or 4 Jackson Brodie novels are masterly in the way that they weave those individual stories in and out of each other.
Yeah, because character's what she's interested in.
Yeah.
I read a thing that she said that all her books, I mean, Kate Atkinson says lots of things, some of which contradict each other, and that tells you a lot about Kate
many
Atkinson.
of them are not true.
Exactly, that tells you a lot about Kate Atkinson and
Yeah.
the mask she wants to wear. But that's why she's so interesting as a writer. But she said once that all of her books were about the journey of the self towards the light. And I thought that was very interesting, and particularly if you read the Jackson Brodie, the novel When Will There Be Good News, and he is in the train crash, and he literally has that experience that she writes so well on the page of travelling towards the light and are you going to die, etc. I found it very interesting when I found that that's what she had said, that all those books were about that.
Yeah. I've got to stop telling the truth about myself. I'm going to start making stuff up.
Absolutely.
I remember Minette Walters, doing an event with Minette Walters one time, and we were sitting afterwards signing books, and Minette said, "Don't you get terribly tired of telling the same story all the same time? Because really we have only one story. We tell the story of our lives, how we became writers. I sometimes just want to make it up. I want to start saying, well, when my sons went to school, I had to give up being an exotic dancer." And so I took up writing fiction.
I love that, absolutely, because I mean, well, I suppose nowadays you think in the information age that everyone would be able to find out that you lied, but then would they mind that you lied? That's the really interesting question now. Your lies can be found out, and yet they can somehow be washed over, which is very interesting.
Your public lies can be found out, but not necessarily your private ones.
No.
I remember one of members of my extended family saying to me at my mother's funeral, she said, "Aye, well, now everybody that matters is dead, your mum and dad, you can say anything you like and there's nobody to contradict you."
I love that.
That's great.
I love that idea. I mean, I love funerals.
I can make up this completely fictitious childhood.
You could. I love that idea, actually. I mean, the funny thing is, funerals are fantastic, aren't they? I mean, all my books seem to end in funerals, and I was thinking with the one I'm writing at the moment, oh, that's not going to end in a funeral, and then I looked at my notes and went, oh, yes, it is. It just wasn't the funeral that I thought, you know. But yes, that idea of the orphan, as the poor wee orphan, you know, the poor person who no longer has the history, because they no longer have someone who goes, no, it wasn't like that. Actually, of course, the flip side of that is that you can just become a completely different person if you want to be.
I could write a completely different memoir from the truth.
You could. But I must ask you as well about my novels inhabit a world, and so they all have different protagonists, but some of the characters that inhabit that world can come back as minor characters in the second one, and I just that's part of it, just the fun of it for me. But of course for you've written several series now which follow one character doing, you know, as the protagonist each time, and so, you know, what does that do to your sense of character living with them for so many years?
Well, you get a real sense of what's possible and what isn't possible, and that whenever I was starting writing a novel with a series character like that, you have to cast your mind back over what's happened in the past, and you have to tailor the plot around what they're capable of and what their history allows them to be and to do. But I'm interested in what you said there about characters moving, because I think my fictitious universe is my fictitious universe, and I can move people around like pieces on a chessboard if I want. So Karen's forensic anthropologist, Karen Perry's forensic anthropologist friend, River Wilde, actually started in a book called The Grave Tattoo, which is a standalone.
That's interesting. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, it's a standalone. And Karen herself really was quite a relatively minor character in The Distant Echo. She plays a crucial role.
Yes,
but it's not there right from the beginning again. So you can take people from one series into another. But I've got the best transfer story ever. At the end of the third Lindsay Gordon novel, I planned to write a trilogy, and so to avoid tempting myself to go back to her, I sent her off to live in America, knowing that I couldn't write a book set in America because I just didn't understand it well enough. So she kept coming back a couple of times to do cases over here afterwards, and then at the end of I think the fourth or the fifth one, she's talking to her partner and saying, and they're discussing coming back to the UK on a permanent basis. Now, in America, I had given her a dog, So I sent off this draft of my novel to my agent, who was a great dog lover, and she phoned me up in a state of great indignation, because it was back in the days when your dog had to have 6 months quarantine when you came in, and she was outraged. How can you do that? How can you condemn that poor dog to 6 months in quarantine, or abandon the dog? And I was she was quite irate about it. She said, you have to find a way around this. And I was telling this tale to my friend Laurie King, the American crime writer, whose books are set she's a series set in California with a cop. I said, I just don't know what I'm going to do, because she's really cross with me. And Laurie said, oh, that's not a problem. We'll just write the dog into the Kate Martinelli novels.
I love that.
So the dog moved not just from one of my series to another, it moved from one of my series into one of her series.
I love that.
Great.
That is amazing, isn't it? I totally love that.
Yeah.
Actually, I was talking to the crime writer and historical fiction writer Sarah Sheridan, who I bumped into in the street in a socially distanced way. And because she lives around the corner from us here in Edinburgh. I mean, Edinburgh's full of writers, and you bump into them constantly, which is part of the fun of it. But she said, she was talking about exactly that, this idea of the interconnectedness of things, and how she was writing a historical novel set in Edinburgh at the moment, in the 1820s. But she also knows a lot about history and real people of history, particularly in Edinburgh, but all over Scotland and other places too. And so she said what she wants to do is people her novel with real people, you know. And she said for some people, for some readers, if you come from Edinburgh and know anything about the history of Edinburgh, you'll be in on the joke, if you like, you know. But for other people, it won't matter at all. And so she's creating sort of meta layers in her novel just for fun, really. But it is this idea of they exist in a world out there, and then they exist in your world within the pages of the book. And definitely for me, my characters, that's partly why I revisit them, is because for me they are all still going on out there somewhere, and I just ship in that pool occasionally and go, oh hello, I'll have you back. I've done it in The Inheritance of Solomon Farthing. There's a couple of mentions of two characters in the historical narrative in The Other Mrs. Walker, because I realised, because I was dealing with a time frame that covered essentially the 20th century, they were still alive, and I could go, oh hello. I had thought it was just something I did in the contemporary narrative, and then I realised I could just play with history too. Fantastic.
Yeah, I feel entirely comfortable in Sarah Sheridan's ability to do that, to weave that in a really clever way. I have problems though when some people decide to create detectives out of people who really existed.
Oh,
you know,
now
that
that's
are some
interesting.
completely insane, like Jane Austen as a detective, Samuel Johnson as a detective. But the one I really struggle with is Gertrude Stein. I mean, you know, Gertrude Stein.
I didn't even know someone had done that.
Yeah, I think that's in any novels, and certainly I've read short stories written by someone of Gertrude Stein. I mean, if Gertrude Stein came across a dead body, what would she say? A corpse is a corpse is a corpse. Alice, clear it up. You know, I mean, there's no story there. Look away now. There is no story here. And I think I find it slightly preposterous when the sort of characteristics of a detective novel are foisted onto a real person who in their real life had no interest whatsoever in uncovering crimes. Yeah,
there's something quite interesting in that though, isn't there? Because I assume that the origins of that are fan fiction. You know, you love the real person's character so much that you want them to become a character, and you become fascinated with the writer's life, so then you make them a character in your own writing. And that is very interesting fan fiction, this idea that people will rewrite either a real person or, of course, a fictional character. Because they love the character so much. It's nothing to do with the plots, it's nothing to do really with all of that side of it. It's all because there's something about the character or the writer of the character, or something about the world that they've created and that they live in, that another person goes, well, I'm gonna dip in that pool too.
And you know, as crime writers, there will come a point in all of our careers where we will have to write the Sherlock Holmes story.
Have you written yours?
No, but I know what it is.
Are you thinking about it? Oh, so you do.
I'm thinking about it. I've been thinking about it for quite a while. It's a question of having the time to do it properly.
Yes, that's really interesting, right? Because I've been thinking about maybe writing a series, like a proper series, where you have the same protagonist a returning protagonist, you know, and that I grew up on like Lindsay Gordon and other series characters, and it is so interesting that I think why is it, having set out this territory of sort of loosely connected characters, that now I actually want to follow one character. It has to be the right person, doesn't it? You have to. And I came across an interview with a person in the newspaper, and who does a very particular kind of job. She's not someone who is a police officer or a detective or anything like that, but she's involved in that world one way or another for various reasons. And I just thought, oh, you're really interesting. I want to know everything about you. And then I thought, well, I'm never going to know everything about her. I might just have to create her in my own image, basically, or create her and make her what I want her to be, almost.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of working around the idea of the same kind of thing at the moment, because with the COVID scenario, I think it's very difficult to write a crime novel set against the here and now, because I write a book a year, and most of my novels are identifiably set in approximately the here and now.
Yeah.
This book that's coming out in August, Still Life, was always planned to be set in February 2020, thank goodness. Dodged a bullet there.
You're not carrying this around with you.
But the thought of writing next year's book, when I have no idea what the situation will be in 6 weeks, never mind 6 months, never mind next year, I find impossible to do. It's just not possible to imagine what that story would be. And I suspect there will be a lot of very bad COVID-19 novels written.
Yes.
And so I've decided to start something fresh that will not be set in the here and now.
So a historical novel?
Well, not. It depends how you define historical.
How do you define that?
How far back do you have to go
really
to be historical?
Because they're not, okay, so is the 1990s historical?
I don't know, but recently a television company has optioned the Lindsay Gordon novels, and they're talking about them as period drama.
And she's what, 1980s?
1980s she starts, yeah.
I think that's definitely period drama. Do you know why I say that? Because my nephews and my niece, who is maybe 19, 20, sees the 1980s as ancient history. Yeah. And I think once you get a generation in, it's historical. Yeah.
And it's just about to start raining. So since we're supposed to wind this up with a workshop exercise for you to do, what we thought we would like you to do is to sit and think about a character, either someone you've already done some work with or someone that you're creating from scratch, and to write a paragraph about them using each of the 5 methods that we've broadly touched on this afternoon. So, straight description, the first version. Their actions, how they behave, what they do, how they do them. Their reactions, how they respond to what's around them or to the people around them or things happening around them. Yeah. The reactions of others to them, which can be very telling. And then dialogue, either a conversation they're having with someone else or their end of a conversation. So we'd like you to work on those 5 aspects of a character and find out something about them along the way.
And can I add a bonus?
You can certainly add a bonus.
Family is my territory. Imagine them standing in a family photograph. Who's in there with them? Who's looking at who? Who's looking at the camera? Who's not looking at the camera at all? What are they wearing? Who dressed them? What happened just before the camera took the photograph, and what's going to happen after?
That's a great idea. And on that cheerful note, we're going to leave you before we get absolutely pissed wet through. Thank you very much. This has been a Moniack Mhor production.